Okay, here we go.
Test.
Roll music?
Let's roll it.
Welcome to the Unknown Morning Show.
It's the show where we explore radio,
Podcasting,
TV,
gear,
gearheads,
and making money with a hot mic and other stuff too.
This is the Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley.
We're doing something different because normally the show's roots have been talking to broadcasters that we know, and we're talking to somebody today that I found online, and his name is Paul B. Walker Jr. Paul, thanks so much for being with us here on the Unknown Morning Show.
Hey, it's a pleasure.
I had seen you posting, and I believe it was on Facebook in the Small Market Radio Facebook page, and it was just general things like, what kind of automation systems are you running around election time on the Nationals? It was, candidates having things on, et cetera, et cetera. Now, and I would look at your profile for McGrath, Alaska, and you would say it said population 271. And I would go, how does that work? And then I looked at more of your stuff to where, are you the one person at the station, Paul?
Yes, I am the only full-time employee. I am the only management employee. I'm the program director. I have one part-time announcer who works 3 hours a day. That's it. He has no management office responsibilities. I have an office manager that works part-time remotely. I have a contract accountant, a contract engineer, and a few scant volunteers.
And I need to add, I'm kind of doing this backwards. Paul is the man at KSKO AM and FM in McGrath, Alaska. You're an NPR affiliate, correct?
Correct. We don't have the AM anymore. We turned that off back in 2015 when generator fuel to power the transmitter became way too much of a burden. So now we're just on FM because it's a lot lower power, a lot more centrally located in each village, and a lot less maintenance and a lot cheaper to operate.
Paul, I was looking at your programming grid that you have. So talks about that you're providing programming to 8 other stations. Do they provide programming to you as well?
We have, and I don't know offhand, we have 7 or 8 other signals that we own that carry our programming 24/7. They could originate their own programming, but for legal responsibilities and FCC responsibilities, they don't. Some of the villages we're in where those transmitters are, they don't even get into the double digits in population. We do share programming with with the station in Fairbanks, which is 30,000 people. And we share programming with the station in Fort Yukon, which is about 500 people.
When I was also looking at your programming, I'm a little bit of a music nerd, and I saw classic rock and roll, and I go, wow, I loved the programming blend, and I saw it would go into country. Do you guys generate your own playlist there in McGrath?
Absolutely. We do country music in the morning. The station has been on the air for 43 years, and it has been country music in the morning from day one, and that is not a hill I'm going to die on and change. The afternoons from noon to 5 can be anything. It's typically a very broad classic rock, classic hits, because that's what the majority of our listeners like. However, I like I think it was last Friday, I did 70s at noon, 80s at 1, and 90s at 2. This past Friday, I did an hour of songs with Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the title, or the weekend. So our music can be quite varied, and as one radio pro says, we are nominally an NPR member station. We don't actually carry a ton of the typical NPR member station programming you'd expect us to.
Well, a lot of times, and the NPR station in Tyler, and this goes back 20 years, when they did have music programming, tended to be kind of like a light adult alternative type thing, and then they turfed it to news. So when I saw music and I saw what you had, I thought, well, that's interesting. I could really get behind this, and I liked it what I saw a lot. Is it all digitally based? I mean, are you able to play it off, say,
like Scott Studios?
Thank you.
Automation?
Thank you.
Yeah, it is all the music is on automation, though we do have CDs. We do have CD players. We replaced a CD player about 2 years ago. We have record players. They work, but probably need a needle replaced. We have several thousand records. We have several thousand CDs. We don't use them. We haven't used a record in 5 years.
Wow.
I was looking at your profile, and I kind of think I know what it is, but I don't think I know exactly. When you DX, what does DXing mean?
That is shorthand for distant reception of radio signals. And I literally go outside. And I mean, yes, even in Alaska, I have to go outside, even in the cold, and tune the dial to see what I can hear. And at 41, I can confidently say that is one of the things that initially got me interested in radio like 30 years ago.
Is this something, and when you're saying turning the dial, this is like, for instance, Clear Channel AM, it's shortwave, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yes, both.
I don't know anything about shortwave. When I was a kid, living in Minnesota, in southern Minnesota at night, we would get KOMA Oklahoma City, WLS Chicago. So I would, when I could get those, I would sit there and have a mini recorder in tape, and then chop those down into air checks, and just to listen to like John Landecker and stuff like that. So, and I've read about like DX cards. So if you're sitting there and you get something either off a Clear Channel or off a shortwave, do you send them a note and say, I, Paul B. Walker, I heard you, and do they send you like a bumper sticker or something like that?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't do that a whole lot anymore because it's, quite honestly, it's a part-time job to process all the recordings and then write reception reports. So for me, it's just at this point, it's really the thrill of hearing it. I do send reception reports if it's something exceptional. And I did that to one station in Australia. I think it's been 3 years now, and I ended up on national TV in Australia a week later because of it.
Neat.
How cool.
I was looking at something here. I believe I saw the Australian interview, but also Spaceline Bulgaria 5900 kilohertz. You have a program on there regularly.
Yes, a benefactor who believes in shortwave to some extent and knows what it is full of and what it is not full of. And it's a lot of religion and talk. Just wants to do something a little different and foots the bill. And 1 hour of my live show on KSKO every Friday afternoon is carried on the shortwave transmitter in Sofia, Bulgaria.
Is it just like a direct thing, or do you basically tape the show, send it to them MP3
no,
style?
It is live. What they are getting in Bulgaria, the feed they are getting in Bulgaria is actually the KSKO web stream. So they are hearing what our FM listeners are hearing. They are hearing what our streaming listeners are hearing, and that transmitter is basically covering the whole of like Central and Western Europe. People have heard it in Italy, and in the winter, it easily makes it to the Northeast U.S. and Northeast Canada.
Wow.
How does that work? In McGrath, when we think of metro areas, at least right here, we have radio and TV and everything. Do you have TV that gets in there, or is it just satellite TV? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, there is something called ARCS, ARCS, the Alaska Rural Communication System, and it's about, I think it's like like 300 TV translators across the state. Most of them are owned by the state of Alaska government. Some of them are owned by city governments, tribal governments, and in some cases, the local radio stations. And the origination feed point for those translators, they're almost all of them are digital now too. What they do is in Anchorage, they have the incoming feeds for the ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, and Fox affiliates in Anchorage and Fairbanks. And like on Sunday, when there's a football game on, whatever network affiliate has the football game is on the ARC's translator network. And, you might have PBS during the middle of the day. So most communities will have one TV translator in them. And the .1 translator channel is a conglomeration of the mainstream commercial networks that they get like 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours a day.
Wow. So the various networks are all.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And
you don't see that very often.
Yes. And we have digital subchannels for the translators that are digital have digital subchannels. The .2, I think, is PBS, or I think it might be PBS Kids. .3 is the First Nations Experience, and .4 is a Alaska government channel.
Interesting.
So when it comes to your radio station, KSKO, I would think that it must feel that it has more vital input than maybe a regular radio station, because you're it, and there's 275 people. So you're really, really, really super serving your community. Am I even close to that?
Yeah, you are, and I hesitate to get too negative on radio, because my background in radio is not public radio. It's commercial radio. But I work for stations that allow me to do what I do without interference and allow me to operate and program like if it were my own. But KSKO is absolutely vital and important. And I like to joke, back when the mayor worked for me, I was like, I'm the second most important person in town, and one of the only two people who can tell the mayor what to do, the other being his wife.
That's a good one.
Oh my. NPR hasn't been, where did you work commercially before getting to McGrath?
I have worked in Laramie, Wyoming, Ord, Nebraska, Redding, California, Marion, Illinois, Beulah, North Dakota, Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, Cocoa, Florida, Western South Carolina, Dover, New Hampshire.
Wow.
You're like me, as I like to say, the well-traveled fullback on the team. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So the NPR opportunity, did this just come up like any other thing? You saw an ad and you answered it?
Yeah, pretty much. Like a lot of people, I'm 41 now for sake of this discussion, and like a lot of people, I started seeing Alaska on TV, all the reality shows, and you got kind of enamored with it. And I've worked in Alaska before. This is not my first rodeo, and it from when I realized I wanted to work in Alaska to getting to do it the first time was about 6 or 7 years. And it was basically, I want to say I've done it. I want to see if I can hack it. I want to see if I can make a go of it. And I did. I left for what I thought were greener pastures. And 6 months later, I regretted it. And I was like, I'll be back someday. And this was in 2017, I think. And 4.5 years ago, the job that I have now was posted. I applied. They interviewed me. They hired me.
Buy me a cup of coffee, Mandee.
Yeah.
I've seen that on other podcasts. That's literally
Yeah, it's like a virtual tip jar. It's really that simple. So you go to the show notes, click Buy Me a Coffee, and then you have an opportunity to support the show in any way you like. Imagine yourself going to coffee with Chuck and myself and saying, hey, I like what you do on the show. I'm going to buy you a cup of coffee. Only all you have to do is click a link. It's that simple.
Do you feel this particular job, and it sounds like with this and the other things that you do with your shortwave program, it tickles enough radio bones in general that if it stays like it is, are you going to be happy with it for as long as they'll have you?
Yeah, pretty much. And that is a good way to describe it. You said tickle the radio funny bones. That's a good way to describe it, because I get to do what I love as a career, which is a job, and have fun doing it, but I get to incorporate, which was never the plan, incorporate a little bit of the hobby into what I do, whether it's broadcasting on shortwave or listening to shortwave. So yeah, it tickles the radio funny bones. When they interviewed me, they said, how long are you going to give us? I said, a winter, a year, 2 years. And I said, well, generally 2 to 3 years. But if you continue to pay me, I continue to accept your paychecks, and we get along, I'll stay as long as you'll have me, most likely.
Nice. Paul, where did you start in radio? Where was gig number one?
Marks, Mississippi, in the Delta, outside Tunica and the home of the blues, Clarksdale, Mississippi.
How did you get your start? Were you part-time? I'm curious. I started by board hopping football games. That was how I got into the business. So I'm always curious to see how people get started.
It was literally answering an ad for someone to be on the air and program. And Marks, Mississippi, the station no longer exists, but is a very poor rural town in Mississippi. I had no experience, and I was willing to go. And that's what did it. And that kind of having a state that, even though it wasn't much of a job, and depending on who I talked to, I don't admit I worked there. It was a station on my resume. Like, you know how people say you need experience?
Yes.
Well, how do you get experience? You work somewhere,
right?
But people won't give you experience to get experience. That job basically spurred on the career. Without that, it would have been harder
sure
to get started.
So where did you go from there? What was the next step?
The next place would have been trying to remember.
No, I have those too.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I was just curious if you made a big leap or if you were kind of bounced around a little bit before you.
I ended up along the Space Coast of Florida.
Okay.
For about a year.
Nice. So you stayed in the South for a little bit before getting enamored with the North.
Well, I discovered that this fat boy from New England really is not a fan of sweating in places I didn't know I had.
That's fair.
Thank you.
I grew up here in Northeast Texas, and so most of my life has been spent in the South, and it is humid. It is hot. Not quite as humid probably as southern Mississippi and the coast of Florida, but I know what you're describing.
Well, I have a friend who ran Tyler's KVUT there, so I know a little bit about the weather.
Okay.
In Tyler, but I also spent 3 miserable months in Beaumont, Texas.
Ooh, yes.
Bar none. Bar none. The most disgusting, oppressive,
yes,
hottest, nastiest summer I've ever experienced in my entire life. Yes, it was so bad you'd take a shower and 5 minutes later go outside and want to take another one.
Yeah, absolutely. So totally different than being. So you were from New England?
Yes, I am. I'm from Connecticut.
Did you study radio?
No, in fact, not a fact I am proud to admit. I didn't finish high school.
Really? Okay.
Correct. I did not, through a series of life events that aren't worth getting into at this point.
Sure.
I did not finish high school.
Well, I didn't study radio either. I think you and I are the same age. And by the time I got into the business, I didn't need a license or anything else. And so we had a friend of the family that was like, hey, we need somebody who's responsible that can show up, to punch some buttons and whatever. And doesn't your kid make A's or something? And that's pretty much how I ended up board hopping football games.
That's her. She's responsible.
The next thing I know, they're like, hey, can you talk into a microphone? And Paul, it was bad. It was really bad. It took a lot of practice to find my way.
I've heard some of my first air checks. Awful.
Same.
Awful.
Yeah, cringeworthy. No. My first gig was in Austin, Minnesota, in a place called, and it's the home of the George A. Hormel Company, which is spam luncheon meat. And yeah, I know. It's that trivia. But my first gig, I was there for 3 years, top 40 station in the late 70s, and the kind of station. And that's, Paul, when I was looking at your programming grid, that's what it reminded me of, because we had news blocks and we had day-parted music. And my first couple of years, we could even bring our own albums. So when I saw your programming grid, the lights just kind of went on. But I was there 3 years, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to stretch my wings a little bit. And I was going over some air check material, and I was like, oh God, this is ghastly. I've got a lot of work to do. And really up until maybe 10 years ago, I'm 60, I'll be 67 in April. I would do air checks enough to where, if the Grim Reaper calls, it's like, where's my resume? Where's my tape or MP3 these days, Always have to have that backup ready just in case,
Aside from being in the South, where did you like working? Like, I know you said you worked for a commercial radio station. Nebraska. What type of programming were you doing there?
We had two stations, a country station and an oldie station. I did afternoons on the country station. I did a little web stuff. I'm typically the guy, if I am not the only staff member, I'm at a station that's going to have a small staff by virtue of where I end up working. But I'm the type of guy who's brought in to pick up the slack. Like when I got fired in Pennsylvania, and I've been fired a couple of times, and as we all know, you haven't worked in radio until you've been fired a couple of times.
Oh yeah.
I started voice tracking for a station in Wyoming. And about 6 months in, they brought me on full time, and I was there to do afternoons. I kind of shored up the digital stuff, the website, the social media, because they had it, but they just did not have the time with the staff they had to keep it fresh and update it, every day. So in cases like that, I pick up the slack and I do the things. I pitch in when the other staff is like, hey, I'm busy. Can you do that? And that's kind of what I do at stations where I'm not the only staff.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I did a lot of that, especially in my early days. I've only been in Tyler Longview broadcast. I haven't moved around. I moved around within the market, but only within the market. But I can relate. I ended up doing a lot of, as the female at the station, oftentimes I got, hey, why don't you take care of public service for us?
Everybody loves to take care of the PSA sheet, right? No.
Well,
it ended up working out well, though.
When I first got here in McGrath, one of my responsibilities was public file stuff. Well, I discovered a loophole, and I wasn't aware of this. Our station, because of our class of license, is not required to maintain an online or paper public file.
Wow.
Oh,
I dropped that like a hot potato 5 minutes after I confirmed it with the attorney. I told my board, I said, we are not legally required to do this. I am not doing it.
Yeah, it's a lot of time wasted.
But at the same time, people say, well, you have to. They don't know the loophole. It's a little known loophole. But I'm like, we far exceed any public service requirement there ever was.
Yeah.
We have exceeded that for the 43 years we've been on the air.
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of the main thrust of what you guys do is
Exactly.
you're serving the community, which is what I love about radio. It's part of the reason I got out of the commercial side of things and do podcasting now is because so many of the commercial stations that I worked for, it became about the almighty dollar versus what was coming out of the speakers and how they were serving the community.
And even in my commercial radio background, it's a business and it always will be a business, but I will not work for people where all it is a business to them.
Yeah.
I worked Laramie, Wyoming. The station I work for there is a perfect example of a station that can be profitable, but still be community minded. It's a small 50,000 watt standalone owned by Ma and Pa, except there is no Ma. It's just one guy who's actually younger than me. He is not rich. He is not made of money. But we are incredibly involved in the community. 2 of the 3 staff, me being one of them, aren't even local. And like, for instance, when we got some numbers, as radio pros call them, the time spent listening to our station in Wyoming by our listeners was 2 to 4 times our competitors.
Wow. That's fantastic.
That's huge. That is huge.
Yeah.
And we're competing in Laramie, Wyoming. We're competing with a Dead Lawyers Estate cluster of stations. We're competing with public radio, and we're competing with Town Square.
Yeah.
And there are things that they all do better than our standalone does. But there is stuff that our standalone does better than they do. And, you know, when people, I'm trying to watch my words, even though I know this is a podcast. People, when people kvetch about what commercial radio is or is not doing, I bring out Laramie, Wyoming as an example. The station has a backup generator. The station has 3 paths into the studio. Like if we had to evacuate or do a live broadcast, we have 3 different paths back to the studio. The best example I can give is one day when we had a freak late May snowstorm that downed trees and knocked out power to 15,000 people. The owner was at the studio in his pajamas at 10:30 at night on the air on generator power.
Wow.
awesome. You hit on something when you were talking about this particular station, Paul, and that is, you know, whether it's Ma or Pa, it's Pa in this case. I work for a family-run radio station, and it's for all intents and purposes 2 stations. One sports talk, the other one is news talk. And the sports talk, there's plenty of opportunities for kids to come in, get their feet wet, board op games. We've had a couple of our people that have, you know, come over to our news division from that. And that's the other thing with radio. It's, you know, if people ask, well, how do I get started in radio? You're kind of hard pressed to tell them.
And you talk about training people and getting people started. I have trouble finding people here. I mean, 275 people, but I have turned several people who've never given radio a thought into what I would call, and I've told them this to their face, so it's nothing new. I said, passable radio announcers in McGrath, Alaska.
So how does this work in terms of Do you take vacation? I mean, just
what's vacation?
okay. Point well taken. You're locked in there. So you probably
it's also expensive. You know, I get vacation time, but it's expensive to fly out, and if I were to go home to see my parents, that's a day and a half. See my dad. That's a day in travel one way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So it's I'd rather, and my dad understands this, and everyone does. I'd rather spend my money on food and my hobby than travel.
Yeah.
And so you probably take a day off here or there.
Yeah.
With the provision to everybody. Oh, by the way, if you need to call me, I'm here. And by the way, do you live at the station, or how does that work?
I used to. We are moving soon. And as part of that process, I moved out. So I'm a couple blocks away now. But I'll be honest, I really liked it when I lived in the building because, as I like to put it, there were some mornings where I woke up and it was like 5 o'clock and I could try and get another half hour, 45 minutes of sleep. There were some mornings I started and I'd be in the studio prepping the morning show, gathering the music, the information. Some of those mornings didn't always involve pants.
Yeah, that's nice. When you're remote working and things like that, you can do that. But I guess if you live at the station, it's similar.
Yeah, in this case, it was. And we're moving in a month or two. Thankfully, I'm literally halfway between the old location and the new location, and the distance. There's like 3 or 4 different ways, different paths for me to take to get to each location. So at 25 below, it's not fun, but it's a very quick, not fun.
Yeah.
Is it like a walkable type thing?
Oh, walkable. If I can get a machine started, a machine type of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I thought when we moved into Tyler before, a few years ago, I had like a 30-minute commute. Well, now it's 7 minutes. So I thought that was good, but just being in the same building, that's pretty awesome.
I one time measured my commute from my apartment upstairs, from my desk, eating breakfast down into the studio. 25 steps. To put it into time perspective, I could start my trek during the closing credits, the funding credits of an NPR top of the hour newscast that are 20 seconds long, and I'd be in the studio before they were done.
Wow.
Ooh. That's some fast prep. That's some fast prep indeed.
So, Paul, are you on mornings? Did I
Yes,
hear that correctly?
I do. I do 7 to 9 and noon to 3. And what's ironic in all of this is I've done mornings at other stations before, and I hated it because back then I was a night owl. I was a night owl, and I would have to drag my sorry carcass out of bed at some ungodly hour that people should never have to see. And even now doing mornings, I do not drink coffee. I do not. I drink tea, and I do tea without caffeine.
Okay.
And a lot of people would be surprised that I'm doing mornings and enjoying it because I was never a morning person.
Yeah.
But here, I'm getting up at 5, not 3:30. So there is that. And I set it up so I can go in, and I'm usually in between 6 and 6:15. I can take my time getting ready because my brain is not revving very fast at 6:15 in the morning. It's kind of like you're trying to start a car in the cold and you turn it over and it takes. There are times I can sit at the computer and just sit there staring at it for a minute and not do anything.
Oh, yeah, that's relatable.
Especially at 6 in the morning, you bet.
Yeah.
Hey, during your show, is it total music or is it a combination of news, music, sports, etc.?
And it is a combination of all of that and whatever needs to be. I, as taking a look at the programming clock wheel, we open the show with a song. Then I do a brief weather update for our entire region. And I touch on anything else that is urgent people just waking up need to know, like when the telephone system goes down for the 6th time in 3 months.
Or
Whatever. Or anything else urgent. We play a couple songs, then we do the lunch menu, this day in history. A little bit later, we do weather, and then what we call messages. The best way to describe messages is the community bulletin board of the airwaves. And one of the things that is, it is our hallmark, our weather and our messages. Listeners know that whenever we have a local DJ on, even if they pop up unannounced, which has happened, or it's a one-off thing or whatever, people know when we have a local DJ on, weather at 30 past and the community bulletin board messages at 45 past. And that is like a must.
Yeah.
And I've heard about this, where people, I think it was one of the Alaska shows on A&E where they would talk about, they would do messages to people at a specific time and they would be announced at a specific time. I thought that was pretty awesome.
They're KOTZ in Kotzebue does Tundra Drums. KCAM in Glen Allen does Caribou Clatters.
Wow.
KIYU in Galena does the Yukon Wireless. We just call it messages.
Keep it simple.
Yep.
Listen, Paul, I want to thank you for taking time and talking to us here on the Unknown Morning Show, giving us, letting us look behind the curtain, so to speak, on, your job there in McGrath, serving the population there and what you do. It's I think that all of us that do radio, feel that, we try to do the best job we can, and it's an important job. But obviously, in your case there, especially with Alaska, and Mother Nature gets its teeth into things, it's a little bit more important too. And we appreciate you taking time and talking to us today.
And I very much appreciate being here. Any chance I get to tell our story. My job is to be an ambassador for the radio station and the people I serve. And when I get a chance to do that, I love to do it, because even though we're on the Iditarod Trail, the dog mushing race, a lot of Bush, Alaska can be forgotten about when big things aren't happening. But the one thing I'll leave people with is, in a place like McGrath, Alaska, radio has a role and the ability to make a very big difference in public safety and public health. And any of my listeners in the last 4 years would be able to tell you that KSKO under me has played an extremely important role in public safety and public health issues. And the city considered us vital to emergency response during and after an emergency. And that, knowing that is what drives me. I do not want to let people down. I could go on and on because I love telling our story. But I operate with the thought that I don't want to give anyone a chance or a reason to hate me. I don't want to give anyone a chance to say I was biased or unfair in anything said on the air, that I was untruthful, that I don't care. And I never want people to use the excuse, I don't know, because KSKO wasn't talking about it. And that's what I do every day.
This has been another episode of The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
And I'm Chuck McKinley.
This is our show to explore radio,
Podcasting.
gear,
And the gearheads that use the gear.
and making money with a hot mic.
And other stuff in between.
We'd love for you to follow us on social media as well. Follow us on Facebook at The Unknown Morning Show and Instagram at The Unknown Morning Show. See us on YouTube at The Unknown Morning Show.
Thank you for listening to The Unknown Morning Show.
I'm Mandee Montana.
I'm Chuck McKinley. And remember, be kind and rewind.